The Mafia boss saw me leaving, then read the note. You won't survive midnight. The night I walked away from the most feared man in Philadelphia, he was standing 10 feet behind me on the steps of his own townhouse, and I never turned around. I heard Roman D'Agosta call my name across the dark street, just once, in the low, measured voice that had made powerful men stammer. I kept walking, my suitcase wheels rattling over the wet cobblestones. Upstairs, folded beneath his reading lamp, he would find a note in my handwriting. 4 words. You won't survive midnight. What he couldn't see from that doorway was my face, because I was crying hard enough to blur the streetlights. What he couldn't hear was my heart trying to climb out of my chest. By sunrise, half the city would whisper that I had betrayed him. By midnight, the empire everyone knew as Roman D'Agosta's would stop existing entirely. And the only man who could have stopped all of it was the man I had just walked away from, letting him believe, for a little while, that I was gone. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because none of that night makes sense until you understand what I do for a living. My name is Vivian Hartley. I'm 38 years old, and I run a one-woman consultancy out of a narrow brick office above a bakery in Old City. I design emergency plans. When casinos flood, when theaters lose power mid-show, when security firms fall apart at the worst possible moment, I'm the woman they pay to make sure the important things survive. 6 months earlier, Roman's people hired me to redesign continuity systems across his legitimate holdings. The casinos, the security companies, the entertainment venues, all the clean storefronts of a very dirty empire. My first exercise was at the Concord, his flagship casino on the river, at 2 a.m, when the floor was empty except for the cleaning crews. I killed the power to the east wing without warning, and Roman arrived in 12 minutes flat, furious, expecting sabotage. I watched a man worth more than small countries stand in his darkened casino and demand to know who dared touch his building. Not his people, his building. So I told him, while his lieutenants glared at me, that his emergency plan protected marble and chandeliers, and that if a real fire came, his plan would save the wallpaper and lose the waitresses. The room went quiet. Nobody talked to Roman D'Agosta like that. He stared at me a long moment, then asked one question. How would you do it? That was the beginning. For 6 months, I tore his operations apart and rebuilt them. And somewhere between the blueprints and the late-night arguments, I started seeing the contradiction nobody else bothered to see. This was a man who could make a state senator sweat through his suit with one look, yet he personally drove an elderly coat check attendant named Mrs. Kowalski to her cardiology appointments because her son worked doubles and couldn't get there. He noticed things about people. He noticed the stagehands at his theater hadn't had a raise in 4 years, and he fixed it without being asked, without taking credit. He noticed that I take my coffee black after midnight and that I hum when I'm concentrating. And every time I told him, no, I won't attend that dinner. No, I won't be photographed beside you. No, I will not become part of your world. This man who had never accepted a refusal in his life simply said, all right, you have to understand what that meant. Roman D'Agosta was born into a collapsing crime family. When he was a boy, the adults around him kept vanishing. An uncle who went to a meeting and never came home. Protectors who switched sides overnight. And finally his own mother, gone before he turned 15, swallowed by his father's falling empire. He grew up with one lesson carved into his bones. People you love leave, and the leaving is never announced. So when he started falling for me, and he did, slowly, the way careful men do, he fought an instinct I could watch him wrestling with in real time. He wanted to secure me. He wanted guards on my building and drivers outside my office, wanted to fold me into his armored world where nothing could touch me. And I told him the truth plainly. I said, Roman, the moment I become one of your possessions, I stop being the woman you fell for. He didn't like it. We argued about it more than once, late at night in his office above the casino floor. Me with my notebooks, him with the scotch he never finished. But he listened. That's the thing that undid me in the end. Not the money, not the power, not the reputation that made grown men cross the street. He listened, and he remembered, and he changed how he stood in a room with me. I fell in love with the discipline of that. Then, 3 months into our quiet arrangement, a lawyer named Prescott requested a meeting with my consultancy, a well-dressed man with soft hands who claimed he represented investors interested in hospitality safety. We met at a hotel bar on Walnut Street. He let me talk for 10 minutes about evacuation protocols before his mask slipped. What his clients really wanted to know was whether a woman inside Roman D'Agosta's operations could be persuaded to share what she saw there. They were very patient people, he said. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I let him believe I was flattered and thinking it over, which is what you do when a dangerous person offers you a door you intend to close gently instead of slam. Then I drove straight to the Concord, walked past 3 layers of security who all knew my face by then, and told Roman everything. Every word, every implication, every dollar figure Prescott had dangled. I will never forget what Roman did next. Nothing. He didn't rage. He didn't reach for a phone. He sat very still behind his desk and asked what I thought it meant, and I told him the truth. Someone was building a coalition against him, patient money, the kind that doesn't shoot, the kind that waits. Then this terrifying man did something I didn't expect. He asked me, as a professional, what I would do if my worst enemy handed me a map of my own weaknesses. I said, I'd ask who drew it, and why. We spent that whole night in his office building an answer, not with guns, with architecture. I asked him the question I ask every client, the one that sounds like ordinary consulting until you understand what it really measures. Which parts of your organization could disappear for 24 hours without actually stopping anything essential? Which buildings, which accounts, which visible symbols could you lose tomorrow and still be standing the day after? Roman looked at me for a long time. Then he started writing names. Here's the secret about empires, the one every emergency planner learns and every arrogant man forgets. Buildings are not capability. Properties are not power. What kept Roman's world alive wasn't the casino or the contracts framed on his office wall. It was 200 loyal people who knew their jobs, cash reserves held in quiet places, licenses structured under companies nobody connected to him, and a reputation for never abandoning the ones who stood by him. All of that could move. All of it. So we built a contingency for the day the coalition got confident. If they moved, if they came for everything at once, I would appear to break. I would walk away from Roman publicly, carry my suitcase past every watching eye, and deliver myself to his enemies as a defector, the wounded insider with maps in her head. I would feed them real information about the parts of his empire he had already decided to sacrifice, and while they feasted, the essential organization would step out of reach. It was my design. I want to be clear about that, because of what came later. Roman's instinct was to refuse, to say no woman of his would be offered up as bait, and we had the worst argument of our relationship right there at 3 a.m. But I made him see the mathematics. They would come through me whether we planned it or not. I was the outsider with the access. The only choice we had was whether my betrayal would be their weapon or ours. For months, nothing happened. Prescott never called back. Life settled into a rhythm that frightened me with how much I loved it. My days at the venues, my evenings split between my apartment and his townhouse, Sunday mornings where he read the paper and did the crossword in pen like a man daring the world to correct him. We never announced anything. I kept my name off his guest lists. 2 careful people, building something neither of us said out loud. Then came the Tuesday in October when a city inspector shut down the East Tower of the Concord over a fire code technicality that didn't exist, and a judge Roman had never met froze 2 of his operating accounts within the same hour. Coordinated, patient, bloodless. That evening, a note arrived at my office with no signature, just a time and a hotel name. The coalition had finally decided it was strong enough. I called Roman. He said 2 words. So it's tonight. We didn't rehearse the goodbye. That was the agreement, because real grief can't be faked twice, and mine needed to survive the inspection of professional watchers. I packed my own suitcase in his bedroom while he stood at the window giving me the privacy to fall apart. He didn't touch me before I left. We had decided that too. A man saying a last goodbye touches the woman. A man being abandoned stands still. Roman D'Agosta stood very still, and it nearly killed both of us. Which brings us back to that sidewalk, that rain, that single time he called my name. I got into the waiting taxi and didn't look back, because looking back would have broken the performance and possibly me. The note was already upstairs where he'd find it. You won't survive midnight. Every cop, every rival, every gossip in the city who heard about it would read those words as a threat from a woman scorned. Only 2 people alive knew it was an instruction. Roman told me later what he did in that room. He read the note twice. Then, before anything else, he checked the time. 10:47. A man who receives a death threat calls his soldiers. Roman checked the clock like a pilot confirming a flight plan, because he wasn't reading a threat at all. He was reading my half of a promise. The empire his enemies recognized, the map they'd spent a year drawing, the Roman D'Agosta they had aimed everything at, had to die before midnight. And then he did the thing no one could explain. The thing that would be whispered about in every back room in the city by morning. He didn't double his security. He cut it. He sent the household staff home with a month's pay, told the guards at the door to take the night off, and personally called the managers of his 3 most vulnerable properties, telling them to send their people home too. A threatened king builds walls higher. Roman opened his gates. His lieutenant, Leon Varga, arrived at the townhouse within the hour, as Roman told it to me afterward. Leon was a broad, graying man of 47 who had served the family since he was 19 and believed with his whole heart that territory defended was the only kind worth having. He found his boss alone in a darkened study, guards dismissed, staff gone, calmly sorting papers. Leon asked what in God's name he was doing. Roman said, without looking up, clearing the board. Meanwhile, my taxi crossed the river toward the Vandermeer, a grand old hotel the coalition had quietly bought through shell companies 2 years earlier, which tells you how long they had been planning. I want you to understand what I was carrying into that lobby. Not a weapon, not a wire, nothing anyone could find on me, because I knew they would search. I was carrying the only thing Bastian Rourke actually wanted, which was my mind and everything inside it. Bastian was waiting in the penthouse suite with champagne on ice, 54 years old, polished as a funeral, the kind of man who had never once raised his voice because he had never once needed to. He had spent a decade organizing the patient money of this city, the financiers, the fixers, the quiet partners, into a single fist. He greeted me like a grieving friend. "Vivian," he said, "I'm so sorry it came to this." Men like him always end up alone. I let him see me exhausted and bitter and relieved all at once, which wasn't entirely acting, because I was exhausted, and I was carrying grief, just not the kind he thought. He asked me why I'd finally left Roman. I gave him the answer we had prepared, the one that fit every rumor his people had already planted. I told him I'd found something in Roman's records I couldn't live with. I let him believe heartbreak had accomplished what his money couldn't. And before I take you inside that suite, before I tell you what I handed him and what it was really for, let me ask you for one small thing. If a story about 2 people outthinking an entire army without firing a shot is your kind of story, tap like and subscribe right now, because what happened at midnight still gives me chills. For the next 3 days, I lived in that penthouse like a guest and a prisoner at once, and I did the most dangerous work of my life. Bastian wanted maps. I gave him maps. I gave him the Concord's emergency protocols, the staffing rotations, the cash handling schedule, the structural weaknesses of every property Roman had decided to let go. Every word I spoke was true. That's what made it lethal, and it's what made it safe. Because truth can be verified, and lies can only be discovered. But I wasn't just handing over information, I was harvesting it. Every session, I asked the questions a good consultant asks naturally. Where will your people stage when the Concord's licenses transfer? Which of your partners handles the unions? Who takes possession of the security contracts? Bastian answered proudly at first, then vaguely, and then, as the victories started piling up, carelessly. Every answer named a person. Every person was a name Roman's organization had never been able to see. The city did its part without any help from us. By the second morning, the story was everywhere that Roman de Agosta's consultant, the quiet woman nobody could ever quite place, had discovered something unforgivable and walked out on him with his secrets in her head. People love that story. It flatters everyone who tells it. Men who feared Roman repeated it with their shoulders a little looser, testing the idea that the king might finally be bleeding. Roman never corrected a single rumor. That's the part nobody understood, the part that made even his own people doubt him. The Roman de Agosta they knew answered insults the way storms answer mountains. Yet as his name was dragged through every social club and courthouse corridor in Philadelphia, he stayed silent, and his silence did exactly what we needed. It confirmed the story. A wounded man rages, a ruined man goes quiet. The coalition heard that quiet and believed it was the sound of collapse. The first property fell on the third day. The Riverside Palace, Roman's biggest entertainment venue outside the Concord, found its liquor license suddenly under review, its headline act bought out mid-contract, its bank calling in a note that had been friendly for 9 years. By every rule Leon Varga had ever lived by, this was the moment for retaliation, swift and unmistakable. He went to Roman demanding it. Roman gave an order nobody could believe. Close the doors. Send everyone home. Pay them. Pay them. While his enemies circled, Roman's first concern was that the Riverside's 200 employees not spend one unpaid night wondering about their rent. Leon left that meeting shaken, and I know the exact shape of his doubt because he later confessed it to me himself. He thought the boss had finally met the one thing stronger than him. Not the coalition. Heartbreak. Leon began quietly preparing loyalists for a war he was certain Roman no longer had the will to fight. And me? I paid a price nobody planned for. Or maybe we planned for it and I simply didn't understand the weight until it landed. Bastian let enough slip about my role that my legitimate clients, the hospitals, the hotel groups, the convention centers, began quietly distancing themselves from my consultancy. Contracts paused. Calls unanswered. I had spent 11 years building Hartley continuity from a card table and a cell phone, and I watched it start to die in real time. Roman wanted to intervene. I found out later he had a list drawn up, contracts he could steer to me, clients he could quietly persuade, and he sat with that list for one long night before putting it in a drawer. The operation required him not to. A man rescuing my business was a man still connected to me. So he let my name burn, and I let it burn. And neither of us called the other because the coalition was watching for exactly that thread between us. So let me ask you something, and I want your honest answer in the comments. If everyone you had ever worked for turned their back on you overnight, and stopping meant losing everything you'd built, but continuing meant destroying your own good name, which would you choose? Because I stood at that window with my phone full of silence, and I chose to keep going. Tell me if you think I was brave or just a fool in love. Why did I keep going? Not for Roman. That's the answer that will surprise you, and it's the true one. I kept going because of Mrs. Kowalski at the coat check, and the stagehands who got their raise, and the 200 Riverside families whose paychecks cleared the morning after the doors closed. The coalition's plan required those people to be crushed first, as examples. My plan required them to be moved to safety first, as the entire point. The collapse accelerated through the week, and it was beautiful, if I'm honest, the way a controlled demolition is beautiful. A warehouse operation here, a private security contract there, a restaurant group, a parking empire. Each one folded almost cleanly, almost politely. The coalition's people moved in and found functioning skeletons, desks empty, systems migrated. The people who mattered already gone to new positions Bastian couldn't see. He captured building after building, and each one weighed less than the last. What he never noticed was the arithmetic underneath it. The properties that fell were the visible ones, the famous ones, the ones with Roman's fingerprints in the paperwork. The companies holding the real licenses, the real reserves, the real futures, had been separated weeks earlier and moved into structures with names like Chestnut Row Holdings and Franklin Pier Logistics. Roman's empire was a ship, and I had spent 6 months teaching it to sink its own silhouette while the hull sailed on. And with every victory, Bastian grew more visible. That's the trap working right there in real time. After the Riverside fell, 3 partners he'd never named came to the Vandermeer to celebrate. After the security contracts flipped, 2 city officials and a bank vice president appeared at his table. After the restaurant group collapsed, the quiet money from New York finally sent a representative. The coalition was surfacing, name by name, and I was writing every one of them down. But don't think for a moment it was easy or safe. On the 5th night, Bastian did something that turned my blood to ice water. We were reviewing the Concorde's floor plans, and without looking up, in the mildest voice imaginable, he said, "It interests me, Vivian, that Roman's people keep surviving every collapse you guide us through. Buildings fall, people don't. A consultant would call that excellent continuity planning." He finally raised his eyes to mine. Unless the continuity planning is the point. In that moment, I was one wrong blink from disappearing into the Delaware River, and we both knew it. So I did the only thing that could save me. I leaned back and I laughed, tired and bitter. "Of course the people survive," I told him. "That's what I built for him. Evacuation works, Bastian. Alarms work. That's why you needed me, isn't it? Because you can have his buildings by Friday, but his people will still be his people when you get there." He studied me for a long, long moment. Then he smiled and poured the champagne, and the subject never came up again. But I noticed the man outside my door doubled that night. That's when I understood the real clock I was racing. It wasn't Roman's survival at midnight. It was mine. The operation had to finish before Bastian finished thinking, because a man that patient doesn't stay fooled forever, and I had maybe 2 days of credit left. What I didn't know, what I couldn't know sitting in that gilded cage, was what the week was doing to Roman. He told me later, in pieces, the way men like him confess things. The townhouse had gone silent in a way he hadn't lived inside since he was 14. He kept finding my things, a scarf over a chair, my reading glasses on the kitchen counter, and every object said the sentence his childhood had taught him. "She left. They always leave." He knew the plan. He had helped build it. But knowing a thing and surviving it are different countries. And Roman spent those nights doing battle with the oldest instinct he owned, the one that said, "Go get her, lock the doors, keep what is yours before the world takes it." He told me he picked up the phone to call me 11 times in 5 days. 11. And every single time, he set it back down. He was learning, at 53, the hardest lesson of his life. Leon watched all of it and drew the wrong conclusion, which was also part of the design, though it cost Roman something to let his oldest soldier doubt him. Leon saw a boss surrendering territory, dismissing guards, refusing retaliation, sitting alone with a folded note he wouldn't let anyone touch. He decided the woman had broken the man. And because Leon loved Roman, he began doing the most dangerous thing a loyal lieutenant can do. He began preparing to save the family from its own boss. I should tell you what carrying that week actually felt like, because the notebooks and the plans make it sound tidy, and it was anything but tidy. I ate dinners with men who discussed my life's work like a horse they were considering buying. I smiled at people who would have applauded my ruin. And every night I laid my head down in an enemy's hotel and trusted a man I could not call, could not see, could not warn to be doing the same. On the seventh night, everything converged. I pieced this part together from what both men told me later. The Concorde itself, the flagship, went dark. Not seized, not raided. Closed by Roman's own order, its people reassigned or paid out weeks earlier, its licenses resting in entities the coalition never traced. Leon stood in the empty casino at 11:40 and begged Roman to restart the floor, to show the city a sign of life. Roman looked at the dark tables and said, "Let it die, Leon." At exactly midnight, the organization the city knew as Roman d'Agosta's empire stopped existing. I was awake in the Vandermeer penthouse, watching the skyline, unable to see a single sign of what had just happened, because there was nothing to see. That was the point. Down in his study, Roman sat alone with my note unfolded on the desk beside him. And he did not know, not for certain, not the way a man needs to know, whether I was still his. Neither did I, if I'm honest. That's the truth I left out of every telling for years. The plan assumed Bastion would move to claim victory the next day, assumed the coalition would gather, assumed Roman would hold his nerve and I would walk into that gathering alive. But plans are prayers with better math. I lay awake until dawn with two men's patience deciding my future, and I had never in my life felt so completely alone. The invitation went out at 9 the next morning, hand-delivered on cream cardstock, because men like Bastion cannot resist ceremony. He showed me his copy over breakfast, savoring it. The coalition would gather that evening in the ballroom of the Concorde itself, Roman's own flagship, to formalize the transfer of everything they believed they had won. They wanted Roman there. Bastion wanted the signature, yes, but he wanted the picture more, the king brought to heel in the room that once proved he owned the city. Bastion brought me to the hotel's business center that afternoon and had me review the surrender documents, his final test disguised as a courtesy. 12 pages of schedules and transfers. I read every line with a stone face while my heart hammered, because page 9 told me the plan had worked. The asset schedules were wrong in exactly the right way. They described an empire made of buildings. The people, the licenses, the reserves, the future appeared nowhere. That evening, the ballroom filled with men who had spent years being invisible, and that was the first thing Roman noticed when he walked in with Leon and no one else. No army, no show of force, just two men crossing a marble floor beneath chandeliers Roman had once owned, while 40 witnesses to his humiliation arranged themselves around the head table. Bastion stood to greet him like a host greeting an honored guest, and smiled the smile of a patient man. Roman sat where they told him to sit. He looked at the documents set before him, and then he did something Bastion did not expect. He didn't read them. He looked around the ballroom slowly, table by table, face by face, and asked a single courteous question. "Is everyone here?" Bastion, amused, asked what he meant. Roman said, "Every partner, every financier, every official, every quiet name entitled to a share of what you're taking tonight. I'd like to see them before I sign." You could feel the greed move through that room like weather. Bastion, flushed with the completeness of his victory, made the introductions himself, and men who had hidden behind lawyers and shell companies for years stood, one after another, to be seen claiming their piece of Roman d'Agosta, a state senator's brother, 2 judges' business partners, the New York money sitting up front in a gray suit. Roman nodded to each of them politely, memorizing, confirming. Then he asked again, "Is that everyone?" Bastion spread his hands. "Everyone," he said. "You built something worth taking, Roman. Take comfort in that." And Roman, this man they believed was broken, leaned back in his chair in his own former ballroom and smiled for the first time in 8 days. "Good," he said. "Then you'll want to hear from the person who brought you here." And Bastion, still smiling, began to answer that he had already thanked me. When the doors at the far end of the ballroom opened, I walked in. I want to tell you I was calm, but my hands were shaking, and I let them see that, because fear reads as guilt, and guilt reads as betrayal, and the room needed one more minute of confusion. 40 faces turned. I watched understanding arrive at different speeds, the slow ones frowning, the quick ones going pale. Bastian looked at me, then at Roman, then at me again, and for the first time in our acquaintance, the polished man had nothing to say. I took the seat beside Roman, in full view of everyone, and I opened my consultancy notebook on the table. For 5 days, I said, I have been in rooms with all of you, asking where you would move and who would move with you, and you told me, because you thought you were winning. Every staging location, every partner, every payment, every official who made a phone call that shut down a license or froze an account. It's all written down, with dates. Roman spoke next, and his voice was quiet, which is when it was most frightening. You spent a year studying my empire, he said, so I gave you my buildings. Look at what you actually hold. Mortgaged shells, union obligations, regulatory exposure from every phone call your people made this week, all documented. You captured debts and evidence. And that note you all whispered about, you won't survive midnight? It was never addressed to me. It was addressed to the empire you thought you knew. A judge's partner stood up and shouted that this was a bluff, that they held the licenses, the transfers, the signatures. Leon answered that one, my old doubter, standing straighter than he had in a week. He read the entity names off the true ownership records, Chestnut Row, Franklin Pier, companies none of them had ever traced, holding everything that actually mattered. Then he looked at Bastian and delivered the sentence I'll remember forever. You didn't beat him, he said. You audited yourselves for him. The room came apart the way coalitions always do, from the edges inward. The small partners started calculating exits. The officials' people started denying they were partners at all. And Bastian sat very still at the head of the table, doing the arithmetic of his life. And I watched him arrive at the true sum. Roman offered them all one path. Leave Philadelphia, unwind every position, and the notebook stays closed. Or stay, and the notebook goes to people who subpoena for a living. No shots were fired. No one was dragged out. The most feared man in the city dismantled the most dangerous coalition in its history with a notebook, a closing schedule, and 8 days of letting the world believe he was finished. They filed out past him one by one, and more than a few of them nodded, because fear like that teaches respect faster than violence ever could. Bastian was the last to leave. He stopped in front of me. He looked at me for a long moment, and I will give him this. He didn't beg, and he didn't bluster. He said, the information was real. Every map you gave me was true. And I said, yes, Bastian. That's what you never understood. I didn't have to lie to you. I only had to know what you'd do with the truth. He nodded slowly, like a man tipping his king, and walked out of the ballroom, out of the city, out of our lives. The ballroom emptied, and then it was just 3 of us, Roman, Leon, and me, standing among the abandoned champagne glasses of men who had come to divide an empire and left owning its paperwork. Leon looked between us for a long moment, this old soldier who had doubted me, doubted his boss, doubted everything except loyalty itself. Then he did something I didn't expect. He nodded to me once, deep and formal, the way you'd salute a general, and left us alone. We drove back to the townhouse in silence, the good kind, the kind 2 people earn. The staff was still away. He made tea himself, badly, and we sat in his study with the rain starting up again against the windows, and for a while neither of us talked about coalitions or notebooks or midnight. Eventually I said the thing I'd carried across the river with me. I asked for my note back. The operation was finished. It belonged in a shredder, not a keepsake box. Roman said no. Just that. No. And he took the folded paper from his jacket where he had carried it all evening, against his heart, through the room of his enemies. Do you know what this would have been? he said. Any other year of my life? Proof. Proof that everyone leaves, that letting someone close is a debt the world collects. He turned it over in his fingers. Instead, it's the opposite. You walked away, and I had every power to stop you, and I didn't. And you came back, he said. Not because I locked a door, not because you had nowhere else to go, because you chose to. I watched a 53-year-old man who had survived the collapse of one family and the building of an empire sit with that sentence like it was the first warm room he'd entered in 40 years. He told me he was keeping the note in his wallet so that every time the old fear whispered, he could answer it with 4 words. But I had my own terms, and I want every person watching to hear them clearly, because they matter more than the ballroom. I told him I would love him, and I would stand beside him, and I would never, not once, become his property, his decoration, or another asset on his continuity chart. My name stays mine. My company stays mine. My locks, my doors, my life, mine. If he wanted a woman to display, the city was full of volunteers. He didn't bargain. He didn't flinch. He said, "That's the only version of you I've ever wanted." And here's what proved he meant it. My consultancy was wreckage, remember? Clients gone, name poisoned. Any other powerful man would have bought my firm outright, fixed everything with a phone call, made me his dependent and called it devotion. Roman never offered. He became a client, signed a standard contract, paid standard rates, and let me rebuild Hartley continuity with my own 2 hands. It took me a year, and it was hard, and it was mine. He sat through it the way he sat through my departure, with his hands open, refusing to rescue me, and I have never felt more loved in my life. That is the thing I need you to understand about the man the city feared. His power never touched me nearly as deeply as his restraint did. Any fool with soldiers can keep a person. It takes a strong man to be chosen. People sometimes ask whether I was ever afraid the performance would turn real, that one of us would lose our nerve in the middle. The honest answer is every hour. But that was the design's deepest secret. The plan didn't require us to be fearless. It required us to keep our promises while we were afraid, which is the only kind of courage I've ever actually believed in. As for the rest of it, the coalition never reformed. The visible empire stayed dead, and the living one beneath it grew quieter, cleaner, stronger, less dependent on marble, more dependent on trust. Leon runs operations now with a planner's patience instead of a soldier's temper, and he tells the story of that week to every young recruit, always ending with the same sentence. Strength isn't what you defend, it's what survives losing. And if this story earned its ending, if you believe the bravest thing a powerful man can do is open his hands, then like this video and subscribe, because I tell stories about the kind of love that doesn't cage what it wants to keep. And tell me in the comments. Roman keeps my note in his wallet to this day. 4 words that once sounded like a death sentence. Would you have kept it, or would you have burned it? These days, our life looks ordinary from the outside, and that's the greatest victory of all. He still does the crossword in pen. I still hum when I concentrate. On Sunday mornings, we sit in the kitchen, 2 stubborn people who once bet an empire on a folded piece of paper. The city still calls him the boss, but beside my own chair, the one I choose every single morning, he's just the man who let me go, and the man I came back to.